It was a hot, late summer afternoon in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, when an 83-year-old grandfather sat down at his kitchen table like he did almost every day. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, the old trooper was dressed for comfort, in a simple t-shirt and boxers, alone in a small house that had always felt safe to him. Within a few hours, that house would turn into a brutal crime scene, and the people who claimed to care most about him would be right at the center of the mystery. If you're the kind of person who likes to drift off while listening to slow, strange stories like this, stories about small towns, secrets, and late-night investigations, you might want to subscribe to Sleep to Stories. That way you can come back here, night after night, for more cases like this one. If you enjoy spending your evenings this way, you can also tap like and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next bedtime mystery. But for now, let's go back to Murfreesboro. To understand how this quiet house in Tennessee turned into the center of a murder case, we need to start many years earlier. Decades before the crime, there was a man known to many people as General Jack Rains. Jack was an 83-year-old veteran. He had worked with the Tennessee Highway Patrol as a state trooper. Later, he had served as chief of police in the small town of Woodbury. He spent most of his life in law enforcement. He was the kind of man people called when something was wrong. He was the man who used to knock on doors and give bad news. He knew how violence looked. He knew how investigations worked. By the 2000s, Jack was retired. He lived in a modest home at 106 McFarlin Avenue, just off Old Woodbury Highway in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It was a quiet residential street, the kind of place where neighbors notice if a car is in the driveway, but the lights stay off. Inside that house, Jack kept a simple routine. His wife, the woman he had shared most of his life with, no longer lived there. She was in a long-term care facility, so Jack stayed alone in the house, but he did not feel alone. He had adult children. He had grandchildren who saw him as a grandfather, not as a tough trooper. He had old friends, and he had some newer friends too. In the mid-2000s, one of those newer friends was a woman from Woodbury named Tina Gail Williamson. She was in her late 30s. Compared to Jack, she was almost half his age. People in Woodbury and Murfreesboro began to notice that Jack and Tina spent a lot of time together. They saw them talking, visiting, sharing rides, sharing meals. Witnesses later told the court that the two had a close relationship. Some said it seemed like more than friendship. At that time, nobody outside their circle really knew what that closeness meant. Some people thought Tina was helping Jack as he grew older, maybe like a caregiver or a friend who checked on him. Others whispered that it was an affair. An older former state trooper and a woman almost 40 from a small town where everyone knows everybody. In a place like Woodbury, rumors like that move fast. As the months went on, the connection between Jack and Tina did not only stay emotional, it started to touch his money and property too. The two of them opened or kept a joint bank account together. On that account, there was a certificate of deposit worth about $100,000. That is a lot of money for a retired man. Both of their names were on it. Jack also transferred some real estate in Cannon County to Tina. Later, his family would say that she used undue influence to get these assets from him, meaning they believed she pushed or manipulated him into giving her things he would not have given on his own. At this point in the story, Jack's children and grandchildren did not know every detail about these deals. To them, Jack was still their grandfather and father, living in his quiet house off Old Woodbury Highway, sometimes needing help, sometimes giving advice. The family trusted that he knew what he was doing. They did not yet see these money ties as part of a crime. By late summer 2007, Jack's life had a steady rhythm. He made regular phone calls. He spoke with friends, including Ron and Tina Williamson. He checked in with family. His days were slow, but they were full enough. On one of those days, in the last week of August 2007, Jack spent hours in Tina's company. Witnesses later told the court that on his last day alive, Jack was with Tina. They saw them together. They saw the old trooper and the woman from Woodbury side by side. At that point, investigators did not yet know that this normal-looking day would become the focus of a murder trial. Late that afternoon, Jack was at home on McFarlin Avenue. His house sat there in a quiet part of Murfreesboro. Neighbors knew him as an older man, a former officer, living alone because his wife was in care. They did not see anything strange that day. No shouting. No broken glass. No sirens. It was just a late summer day. Inside the house, in the kitchen, there was a table where Jack often sat. He wore a simple t-shirt and boxers. For an 83-year-old man at home by himself, that outfit made sense. He probably felt safe enough to relax. At that moment, no one knew that this exact detail, his clothing, would later become a key part of the case against one of his closest friends. Sometime that afternoon, everything changed. While Jack sat at his kitchen table, someone stood behind him and shot him 5 times in the back of the head. Forensic experts would later say that 3 shots came from some distance and 2 at close range, like an execution-style killing. One police source later said, 5 rounds to the back of the head for somebody that's 83, that's overkill. For now, all we need to know is that this was not a quick accident. It was focused, brutal violence against a frail old man in his own kitchen. After the shots, the house was quiet again. The killer left Jack slumped over the table. His t-shirt and boxers stayed on his body. Blood pooled and dried. The front door and windows looked normal from the outside. Whoever did this walked away, leaving him there. There were signs that things were taken or disturbed in a way that would later make police think about robbery. For roughly a day, nobody found him. The people who usually spoke to Jack tried to reach him. He did not make his usual calls. He did not answer the phone. His silence did not match his normal routine. Friends noticed. 2 of the people most worried were Ron Williamson and his wife Tina. They had not heard from Jack. Phone calls went unanswered. They started to feel that something was wrong. So, on September 1st, 2007, Ron and Tina drove to Jack's home on McFarlin Avenue to check on him. Picture that moment. It is a quiet residential street. The house of an old trooper. A married couple who described themselves as his close friends walk up to the door. They enter the house. Maybe they call his name. Maybe they move from room to room. Then they reach the kitchen. On the table, they see Jack. He is in his t-shirt and boxers. He is slumped forward, not moving. When Ron and Tina look closer, they see that the back of his head has been shot multiple times. They know this is not a natural death. They call authorities. Soon, Murfreesboro police officers and Rutherford County investigators arrive. First responders secure the scene. They confirm what Ron and Tina reported. Jack is dead. He has been shot 5 times in the back of the head. He sits at his kitchen table in his undergarments. Right away, police treat this as a homicide. There is no doubt. An elderly veteran killed in his own home. In the first days of September, investigators work carefully through the scene. They take photos. They collect bullets and fragments for ballistics. They note his clothing and position. They mark any items that look disturbed or missing, anything that might point to robbery. The picture they see is brutal and personal. An old man shot over and over in the back of the head, in a place where he should have been safe. At this point, detectives know some basic facts. They know who Jack was, a retired state trooper, former small-town police chief, respected in Tennessee law enforcement. They know where he lived, a modest home at 106 McFarlin Avenue off Old Woodbury Highway. They know he lived alone because his wife was in a care facility. They know which day his body was found, September 1st, 2007. They do not yet know exactly when he was killed, though the autopsy will later suggest it was the day before. They also know who found him, Ron and Tina Williamson. They know that this couple were his close friends. They know that Tina in particular had spent significant time with him. But at this early stage, Ron and Tina look like grieving witnesses. They are part of Jack's inner circle. They are people who cared enough to check on him when he did not answer his phone. In the days right after the murder, detectives start their usual work. They interview family members, neighbors, and friends. They ask about enemies, debts, arguments, old grudges. They ask about Jack's daily habits. Who did he usually see? Who had access to his home? Who knew his routines? Very quickly, one theme keeps coming up in interviews. There was talk of an affair. People mention a woman about half Jack's age. They say the retired trooper was spending a lot of time with her. As police dig deeper, they learn that this woman is Tina Williamson. Detectives also begin to hear about money. They learn there was a joint bank account that Jack shared with Tina. On that account was a certificate of deposit worth around $100,000. They learned that Jack had transferred real estate to Tina in Cannon County. To investigators, these facts start to suggest a possible motive: financial gain. At this point in the investigation, the picture is still blurry. Detectives know that Jack and Tina had a close relationship. They know she is much younger than he is. They know she found his body with her husband. They know she appears often in stories about his last days. But they do not yet have hard physical evidence tying anyone to the shooting itself. As September moves on, they keep looking. They review banking activity linked to the joint account. They notice transactions after Jack's death that look unusual. These movements of money catch their attention because it looks like someone may have accessed funds right after the murder. Investigators write down amounts, dates, times, and who had authority on the account. The pattern seems to point toward Tina. In the fall of 2007, as they build the timeline, detectives realize that Tina played two key roles. First, she was one of the last people known to have seen Jack alive. Witnesses said he spent his last day with her. Second, she was part of the couple who discovered his body. That dual role makes her central to the case. She is both a main witness and a possible suspect. While they look into finances, they also continue to study the physical evidence from the scene. They send Jack's clothing to the lab. They check his two-shirt and boxers for any trace material: hair, fibers, skin cells, anything that can hold DNA. At first, this is just routine. They do not know if they will find anything helpful. Around the same time, they examine weaponry and ammunition found during the wider investigation. They look at bullets recovered from Jack's kitchen. They compare them to ammunition and guns connected to people around him. Reports later say that elements of the ammunition and firearms linked to Tina matched what was used at the crime scene. This strengthens the idea that someone in her circle had direct access to the murder weapon or similar weapons. While all this lab work and record checking happens in the background, Tina continues to present herself publicly in a certain way. She tells people, and later tells investigators, that she did not have a sexual relationship with Jack. She admits they were close, but she denies that it was intimate. To many in the small community, that makes sense. She is married to Ron. Saying there was no affair keeps things simpler. It makes her look like a loyal friend, not a lover. Detectives, however, are not fully convinced. They have heard too many rumors. They have seen too many signs that Jack and Tina were more than just casual friends. Still, at this point, they need evidence, not just talk. That evidence arrives late in 2007, when forensic testing on Jack's clothing comes back. On his boxers, the lab finds DNA that belongs to Tina Williamson. This is a turning point. Her DNA on his underwear is a strong sign of intimate contact. It directly clashes with her own denial of any sexual relationship. With this, investigators feel they have caught her in a clear lie. From then on, the case against Tina begins to harden. Detectives prepare materials for the district attorney's office. They highlight several points. Jack and Tina had a close relationship. They spent his last day together. She was among the last people to see him alive. She found the body and took part in the call to police. There was a joint bank account and a large certificate of deposit for $100,000. Jack had transferred property to her. There was unusual banking activity after his death. Her DNA was on his boxers. Weaponry and ammunition associated with her matched what was used in the crime. Each fact on its own might not be enough. Together, they form a chain. In December 2007, that chain leads to the next step. On December 4th, a Rutherford County grand jury issues a sealed indictment. Sealed means it is kept secret at first to protect the investigation. The indictment charges 39-year-old Tina Gail Williamson of South McCrary Street in Woodbury with first-degree murder, felony murder, and especially aggravated robbery, all connected to the death of General Jackrains. Later that same day, Murfreesboro police arrest Tina. News reports describe her as an acquaintance of Jack. For the public, this is a shock. The woman who helped find his body is now accused of killing him for money. Soon after, the case moves into court. In December, Tina's lawyer, Bob Peters, appears before Circuit Court Judge Don Ash. Tina does not come in person. Her attorney handles a motion for arraignment for her, meaning he enters her first responses in her place. Judge Ash schedules a discussion day for January 7, 2008. On that day, Tina and her attorney will enter a formal plea and talk about the case with the district attorney's office. On January 7, 2008, Tina formally pleads not guilty. She says she did not murder Jack. She says she did not rob him. The case is now set up for a full trial. At the same time, Jack's family starts their own legal battle. On January 15th, they file 2 civil lawsuits. One is in Cannon County Chancery Court about the real estate Jack transferred to Tina. The other is in Rutherford County about the $100,000 certificate of deposit on the joint bank account. In these civil suits, the family claims Tina used undue influence over Jack, and they ask the court to give the property and funds back to them. Tina answers these suits by saying the family members have no standing, which means she argues they do not have the right to bring such cases. The civil matters are given jury trial dates in August. So, while the criminal case is moving forward, there is also a separate fight over money. Over the rest of 2008, prosecutors prepare for Tina's criminal trial. They plan to show the jury her close relationship with Jack, the financial ties, the DNA evidence, and the weapon and ammunition connections. The defense team works on a different picture. They will say there is no direct proof she fired the gun. No eyewitness. No video of the shooting. They will focus on weaknesses in each link. In February 2009, Tina's murder trial begins in Rutherford County Circuit Court, again before Judge Don Ash. She is now about 40 years old. She faces charges of first-degree murder, felony murder, and especially aggravated robbery. On the first day, 8 witnesses testify about the relationship between Jack and Tina. They say the bond was close. They say the 83-year-old retired trooper spent his last day alive with her. One former detective, Ralph Mayerchik, testifies about the discovery of Jack's body. He tells the jury that on September 1, 2007, Jack was found at home, shot 5 times in the head. He explains that he charged Tina with first-degree murder, felony murder, and especially aggravated robbery. In media later, Mayerchik is quoted reacting to the idea of an intimate relationship between Jack and Tina by saying, "When we hear that Tina and Jack were having some kind of intimate relationship, that's like, wow!" Prosecutors present their theory. They say Tina killed Jack for money. They show the joint account and certificate of deposit. They talk about property transfers. They emphasize the brutal nature of the killing, 5 bullets to the back of the head, execution style, overkill for a man of his age. They point out the DNA from Tina on Jack's boxers. This, they argue, proves she lied about the nature of their relationship and connects her physically to the victim in a private setting very close to the time of the crime. They also bring up more subtle pieces of evidence. Court records and news reports mention unusual banking activity after Jack's death. They mention that weapons or ammunition tied to Tina match what was used in the killing. They note behavior that seemed strange in the days after Jack was found. Together, the prosecution says, these details form a trail of lies the police followed to find the killer. The defense attorney, Bob Peters, speaks to the jury too. He says there is no proof that Tina fired a pistol, much less 5 bullets in the back of the head of Mr. Rains. He tells them she is disabled and not in physical shape to commit murder. He reminds them that the case is circumstantial. There is no witness who saw her pull the trigger. There is no video of the shooting. He suggests that each part of the prosecution's story could have another explanation. Through all of this, at least in local reporting, Tina shows little emotion. When people talk about her, they mention her flat face as the verdict approaches. She continues to say she is innocent, telling reporters later that she is truly to God innocent. We will come back to what the jury decided. But first, this is where we pause the investigation in progress, part of the story. Now let me walk you through what investigators and courts eventually pieced together and how they believe this murder actually happened. According to the final court record and the way media later described it, Jack Rains, an 83-year-old veteran and retired trooper, had entered into a secret, intimate relationship with Tina Gale Williamson, a woman nearly half his age from Woodbury. This relationship was not only personal, it was financial. He put her name on a joint bank account that held a certificate of deposit worth around $100,000. he transferred real estate in Cannon County to her. These moves gave her access to a large part of his savings and property. Investigators, and later prosecutors, believed that over time, Tina's focus shifted from friendship and intimacy to what she could gain financially from Jack. The civil suits filed by Jack's family, which claimed undue influence, fit this picture. They saw her as someone who took advantage of an elderly man's trust. In this view, the joint account and property transfers were early steps in a pattern of financial exploitation. On the afternoon of the murder, witnesses said that Jack spent his last day alive with Tina. They were in close contact. Sometime that day, the two were together in or near Jack's home. Inside, in the kitchen where he often sat for meals or phone calls, he relaxed in a t-shirt and boxers. At some point, according to the prosecution's theory, Tina either brought or had access to a firearm and ammunition that matched the type later found in his head. Standing behind him while he was seated and vulnerable, she fired 5 shots into the back of his head. 3 were from some distance, 2 at close range. This pattern suggested a planned, execution-style killing rather than a struggle. After the shooting, the killer left Jack slumped at his kitchen table. The house showed signs that fit especially aggravated robbery. In Tennessee law, that charge means that very serious violence happened along with theft. Prosecutors argued that the robbery was part of the murder, that Jack was killed to secure money and property, and that items were taken or accounts accessed around the time of his death. When Ron and Tina went to the house and discovered the body on September 1, 2007, they called the police like concerned friends. But by then, according to the state's case, Tina had already committed the crime and was using her role as a friend to appear innocent. Investigators believed that her actions after the killing, including unusual banking activity on the joint account, were attempts to move or protect money that she now controlled because Jack was dead. One of the most important clues was the DNA on Jack's boxers. That material linked directly to Tina. It proved intimate physical contact when she had publicly denied any sexual relationship. Detectives saw this lie as the first piece of a trail of lies that led them to her. When they added the financial ties, the timeline that placed her with Jack on his last day, her role in discovering the body, the weapon and ammunition connections, and her behavior around the time of his death, they built a narrative where she was not only involved, but central. At trial in February 2009, the jury heard all of this. They also heard the defense's argument that the case was circumstantial and that there was no direct proof she fired the gun. After weighing the evidence, on February 4, 2009, the jury returned a mixed but strong verdict. They did not convict her of first-degree premeditated murder as originally charged, but they did find her guilty of second-degree murder, felony murder, and especially aggravated robbery in the death of General Jackrains. Felony murder here means that Jack was killed during the commission of a felony, in this case, robbery. Local reporters noted that Tina showed little emotion when the verdict was read. Judge Don Ash immediately revoked her bond and ordered her into custody. At sentencing later that year, he imposed life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 20 years. Tennessee authorities explained that in this context, life equals 51 years. Added to 20 years, that makes a total sentence of 71 years. With that math, Tina would be eligible for parole in 2065 when she would be about 96 years old. After sentencing, Tina continued to say she was innocent. She told reporters she was truly, to God, innocent. She appealed her conviction. In 2012, an appellate court reviewed the record and ruled that the evidence was sufficient to support the jury's findings. Her appeal was dismissed, and her 71-year sentence stayed in place. As of later media reports, including in 2018 and 2022, she remains in a Tennessee correctional facility. For Jack's family, the end of the trial did not end their struggle. They continued with their civil suits to regain property and the $100,000 certificate of deposit. These suits showed how deeply the murder had tied together emotional loss and financial harm. Jack's children and grandchildren also had to live with the shock of learning not just how violently he died, but how complicated and secret his private life had become in his last years. Over time, the case drew attention beyond Murfreesboro and Woodbury. It was featured in investigation Discovery show The Devil Speaks in an episode called Dirty Little Secret. That episode used real audio, 911 calls, police interviews, family conversations to tell the story. Later, Oxygen series Killer Relationship with Faith Jenkins devoted a Season 3 episode to Jack's murder. That show explored the relationship between Jack and Tina and how investigators followed a trail of lies to uncover the truth. True crime podcasts like Murder Squared also cover the case, describing Jack as an 83-year-old veteran whose killer was found by tracking lies and hidden connections. In the end, the official story that investigators pieced together was this: a respected, elderly law enforcement veteran entered into a secret and financially tangled relationship with a much younger woman. That woman, driven by money and supported by access to his assets, shot him in the back of the head in his own kitchen, then tried to stand among the mourners as a grieving friend. It took careful work with bank records, DNA tests, and patient interviews to turn that image of a worried visitor into the image of a convicted killer. When you think about Jack sitting alone at his kitchen table that afternoon, and about the slow way the truth came out over the months and years afterward, it raises quiet questions. How well do we really know the people we trust with our hearts, our homes, and our money? And what happens when secrets, age, and need mix together behind a closed door in a small town? That's it for tonight's story. Thank you for staying with it all the way to the end. If you found yourself drifting into this case, and you'd like more stories like this one to keep you company at night, feel free to look around the rest of the channel. There are more mysteries here, and many more on the way. If there's a case you'd like to hear about next time, or if you have any thoughts about Jackrains and what happened in his kitchen that summer, you can share them down in the comments. This was Sleep to Stories. Good night and sleep well.